2024 brings with it a whole host of global concerns. The war in the Middle East could spiral into a regional conflict. International support for Ukraine is waning, raising fears Kyiv will lose territory to Russia. And the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence could reshape our world. But none of these rank as the top global risks this year, according to a U.S.-based geopolitical consultancy firm. The Eurasia Group says the United States and its political climate represents the top global challenge of 2024. In just under 10 months, Americans head to the polls for a presidential election. Their likely choice, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. America's decision could have global implications for years to come. Ian Bremmer is president of Eurasia Group and G0 Media. Ian Bremmer, welcome back to the show.
Always good to join you.
I was tempted to say Happy New Year, but after looking at your list, I'm not so sure. When you look at all the things happening in the world, we've got wars, we've got coups, we've got economic uncertainty, and the United States is topping your chart. Why is that the top risk from your vantage point?
Yeah, I like to say happy top risk day for those who celebrate. And that really separates the wheat from the chaff right there. Why the United States? Well, first, the way we look at these reports is we're ranking them on the basis of likelihood, imminence, and impact. And the U.S. is the most powerful country in the world. It also happens to be by far the most dysfunctional of all of the G7 democracies. It's the one advanced democracy that does not have the ability to assure a legitimate, free, and fair transfer of power. And, you know, when you put it that way, it sounds stark, but the fact is that we've seen a lot of unprecedented things in the U.S. political system over the past months, and they've been normalized. I mean, you know, you see 91 indictments against the former president, and when the next one comes down, you go, well, I guess that's just the way it is right now. But no, historically, that's never been the case in the United States. You see a House without a speaker, and you can't put forward legislation. You've got new rules that any one member can bring the House Speaker down. And you say, well, I guess maybe that's the way it works right now. And you see this incredibly adversarial relationship between Democrats and Republicans not sharing the same basic understanding of facts in the political environment. And again, you can't really run a sustainable democracy that way. So, I mean, the fact is that in 2024, U.S. democracy is in crisis. This election matters immensely. And no matter who wins, the losers are very unlikely to see the outcome as legitimate. And indeed, the losers feel like they have an immense amount to lose. I mean, if Biden loses, he and many of his advisors think they face legal jeopardy from a politicized FBI, DOJ, and IRS. If Trump loses, he's probably going to jail. And that also means that the risks around the election itself, in other words, to disrupt the election, internally, as well as externally by bad actors that see opportunism in the chaos, are far higher than we've ever experienced in our lifetimes. I mean, if those aren't enough reasons for us to put this as the #1 risk for 2024, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, the erosion of norms, the weakening of institutions, all sort of a part of this. You mentioned the two options Americans will likely have in November, in Joe Biden and Donald Trump. You describe both of these candidates as uniquely unfit for office. Why is that?
Well, they're unfit in very different ways. If Trump were not running, no one would think it was okay for an 81-year-old to continue to run. I mean, no one thinks that Biden is going to be able to serve throughout a second term where he'd be 86. No one thinks that. So, I mean, that's a direct unfitness for him in this race. But more broadly, and much more importantly, the fact that former President Trump attempted to subvert, doing everything in his power to subvert the legitimate outcome of a free and fair election. In any normal, well-functioning democracy, you've got that former president running again. That would be the #1 issue. And yet it isn't in the United States. Why not? And that's because lots of Americans no longer trust or believe in their institutions. That's a much deeper problem than Trump. It's been coming for decades now. Trump is a manifestation of it, is that he's a symptom of it. And one more point I'd raise, because all of this is November, and you know, we still have a bunch of months that we don't really need to pay attention, right? But Trump is about to get the nomination. It's not certain yet, but it's very, very likely. When he does, overnight, he becomes radically more powerful. The entire Republican Party will get behind him, will become loyal. The Republican media and conservative media apparatus and social media and the rest, he will be their guy. He'll have the money to run. And what that means is his policies on trade, on border security, on Islam, on the Middle East, on Iran, on Ukraine, on Zelensky, they will become far more powerful. They will become the Republican Party platform.
Right.
And that has a big impact on America's role in the world well before November. So, I mean, this is coming, and this is coming soon.
The implications of that for Canada, right? Like, I know the border is mostly focused on the southern border with Mexico, but increasingly there's talk about the northern border. Trump tried to tear up NAFTA, right? He's talked about pulling out of NATO. What are the implications and all this you see for Canada in the year ahead? What's at stake for us in this election?
In the near term, Canada, because Trump is the one that succeeded in ensuring that the USMCA became the successor to NAFTA, that's a big near-term win. And Trump loves things that he did. Right. It's about him. So he's not going to try to disrupt that, though, because there will be a negotiation for the window of continuing with NAFTA. It has to continue to be renegotiated. If Trump were to win, there would be some hardball, probably once again from Bob Lighthizer, I know one of Canada's favorite policymakers, who will likely be part of a Trump team in a potential second term. So I do think there will be risks in the administration. In the near term, the risks for Canada have much more to do with the spillover effect with a violent and polarized political system in the U.S. I mean, that Ottawa trucker strikes, that was an export for the United States, U.S. social media, and U.S. political informal organizations. You'll see a lot more of that hitting Canada on the back of the United States, sneezing. Canada's going to catch a cold. That is the way it looks politically.
You mentioned a violent political culture, I believe was the phrase that you used. Do you see how serious is the risk for political violence in this electoral season? Because if you go back to the last round, Trump started sowing doubt in the results before the first ballots were cast, and then everything eventually led to January 6th. Where do you see it right now? Yeah.
If he thinks he's going to lose, again, facing prison, which for Trump is much more important than the idea that the U.S. democracy might face an existential challenge. This is him, much more important than U.S. democracy. And so, I mean, yes, would he use his soapbox? Would he use his megaphone? Would he use his money? Would he use his supporters to come out in defense of having a second stolen election against him, as he would put it, as they would believe? Absolutely. I mean, I don't think we risk another January 6th because the U.S. will be ready for it. Washington will be locked down. But in red states, in purple states, in states that are heavily contested and have large number of loyalists for Trump, many of whom are gunned up, absolutely. I mean, you remember Portland, and that was on the left, but creating their little autonomous zone years ago. I think you'll see something like that, but a lot of it around different states in the country. And yes, I absolutely expect that that'll be violent.
Just as a last point, sort of some of the global implications of this. I mean, America is the biggest domino in the global power order. If Trump wins, the U.S. is almost certainly out of NATO, it would seem. And what do you think the sort of the global implications are? What's at stake for the world in this election cycle?
So it's interesting. I don't think that the U.S. is almost certainly out of NATO, as you just put it, if Trump wins. But I think NATO will fragment. Right. Because if Trump wins, he will stop supporting Zelensky. He sees Zelensky as a personal enemy that refused to open investigation against Biden and against Hunter when Trump personally asked and pressured him to do so. That perfect phone call, as Trump described it. So if Trump wins, he's going to say, no more U.S. taxpayer support for the Ukrainians. I want to end this war. You've got to accept partition. Well, Zelensky's not going to do that. So what happens is the Americans stop providing military support and economic support for Zelensky. The Ukrainians look like they're going to lose. Putin looks like he's going to take Odessa. He's going to march towards Kiev. And the Polish government, the Baltic governments, the Finns, the Swedes become extremely concerned about what that means. They have to go all in to stop the Ukrainians from falling, while the Italians and the Spaniards and, maybe the French, some others are saying, well, this is really expensive. Why are we paying all this money? Let's find a way. Let's cut a deal. That is, and of course, Trump very much putting his finger on that scale, along with someone like Viktor Orban from Hungary. That isn't the United States leaving NATO, but that is NATO falling apart.
Right.
And I think that's, frankly, probably the most likely scenario if Trump gets a second term. And again, looking at it right now, I don't have high confidence in predicting the results of the U.S. election, but it's certainly at least a coin flip that Trump wins. So, I mean, how do you not consider this the most important? When I started Eurasia Group back in 1998, so 26 years ago, we did not do any research or analysis on U.S. domestic politics. You didn't need to. It was a consolidated democracy. It is inconceivable that you could do work on the geopolitical order and the instability around it today and not focus first and foremost on what's happening in the United States.
Ian Bremmer, always appreciate your time. Ian Bremmer is president of Eurasia Group and G0 Media. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.